cold, so I will try and get through. But I did, Lois, I was able to hit the low notes in that last song, so I don't, those normally I would struggle with a little bit more, so that's good. And yes, it's good to be here. It feels like I'm home. And we didn't have to travel too far this morning, and with me this morning is my lovely wife Darlene, and our son Adam is also joining us, so you can maybe meet them afterwards. My clicker. So, I don't know about you, but I have to confess that I'm one of those people that sometimes tends to drift around a little bit during the sermon. I hope Laurel's not watching or listening to this. So I'm going to make this very easy for you because I know everybody listens and learns in different ways, some verbally and some written. So here's my main point. Everyone in our society deserves to have safe, affordable, and appropriate housing. And as Christians, we are called to respond to the needs that we see around us. And housing is one of the most basic needs there is. Responding to needs in our community, it's a tangible way that we demonstrate God's love. It's how we bear fruit. And while there may be any number of reasons why someone finds themselves in a difficult financial position, Scripture is clear. As Christians, we are called to respond. So now, with that out of the way, Randy, quit thinking about the Leafs, all right? Someday you might see them hoisting the Stanley Cup in a color picture. You were already starting to drift a little bit, weren't you? Yeah. So I'm going to drive this one home, folks. What's my main point again? That as Christians, we are called to respond to the needs that we see around us, and housing is one of the most basic needs that there is. Responding to needs in our community, it's a tangible way that we demonstrate God's love for us. It's how we bear fruit. So there might be any number of ways reasons that somebody finds themselves in a difficult situation. I wanted to share some thoughts with you this morning about housing. Because I think creating housing is so much more than supplying the physical structure, supplying the house. We may sometimes call people homeless, but that's often just a quick shorthand way of saying they don't have permanent housing. Home embodies so much more than just the structure. It means a place where there's a sense of community, where there are quality relationships, and where the physical, mental, and spiritual needs of each of us are tended to. I think somebody can be housed, but they might still be homeless. They may still be isolated and alone. So we're going to take a look at the first scripture from Psalm 27. And in this one, I love how the Psalms talk about the love and the protection of God. The Israelites at this time, they were very vulnerable, and it seemed like everybody was against them. But with the Lord on their side, they were going to be okay. Some few key verses that you might have picked up as Jason was reading it. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? My heart shall not fear, yet I will be confident. One thing I ask of the Lord, that I will seek after, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me in the cover of his tent and set me high upon a rock. Do you notice all the housing references in there, right? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, the house of the Lord, the temple, his shelter, his tent. For David, the physical structure, even if it was just a simple goat skin tent, was important for offering protection. And to be shared with the Lord, well, that was when it became transformative and safe. That was when he could be at ease. And think about it, over the past few years, through the pandemic and afterwards, when have we felt most safe and secure? It's been when we've been in our homes. Throughout the Bible, the idea of home is often used as a kind of a shorthand that instantly brings to mind a place of security and comfort. So for example, 2 Samuel 7 verse 10 says, I will provide a place for my people, and I will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did in the beginning. A place where they can have a home, a place that they long for. The psalmist used the idea of being planted by a river in a safe and secure house of a home as a way to quickly communicate a whole range of ideas and thoughts. A home of their own. And I think that God has planted in each one of us the desire for something, an idea that I call home. I believe everyone is searching for that idea of home. And what does that look like? You might even know people, always on the move from one house to the next, building and building and building again, and in search of that elusive perfect garage or that perfect house. It's this eternal quest for home, for being in the presence of God, that I think stirs us on our life journey to seek and to find God. Now, many of you know that I enjoy photography, and by now you've obviously noticed that I enjoy using images to accompany what I'm saying. And yet I struggled a little bit to find a slide to represent the idea of home. And I think that's because for each one of us, the idea of home is different. So this abstract image, it seemed to work the best for me. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to ask you each just to take a moment and think of home. And I suspect as you were thinking of that, each one of you, and this is just a guess, but my guess is that each of you were thinking of a place of your childhood, right? And depending on how long you lived there, you may have also imagined yourself there at a certain age. And while all of our experiences growing up are a mix of good and potentially difficult times, I think we also intuitively remember a time when someone, likely our parents, but possibly somebody else, was looking out for our physical, our mental, and our spiritual needs. They were creating for us that sense of home. And to some degree, I think we are in a lifelong journey to find that sense of home. So in practical terms, in 2024, searching for home is not really just a heady concept to ponder. We are in the midst of a housing crisis. You hear about it every day in the news. Every day. Stories like this is from the encampment in Kitchener on Victoria Street. If you've been there over the last number of years, this is what it looks like. These images used to shock us, and they've now become normalized for us. People are struggling to find a very basic type of accommodation. Affordable housing gets bandied around a lot, but what does that actually mean? Is it finding basic housing for people living in encampments? Housing alone won't solve their challenges, since issues related to mental health and addictions often make retaining that housing extremely difficult. And what are the root causes, right? Abuse, breakdown of the family structure, a general failure of society, of church. So we respond with a temporary solution that not surprisingly becomes a permanent solution. The tiny homes on Herb Street, next to the landfill. Next to the landfill. What does that communicate about our priorities? And others in our society, they just need something to access that they can afford, which in this market means more density. We hear a lot about that, more density all the time. And that's okay, as long as it's not in our neighborhood, right? So higher density, shadows, and lack of green space are considered bad, unless they happen to be in Portugal, right? And then we travel halfway across the world to experience it and call it quaint and vibrant and cosmopolitan. This was the view from our balcony when we were there 2 weeks ago. Then we return and look out our backyard and say, that was a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. What a contradiction, right? Is this the definition of hypocrisy in me? Can I justify it by saying, well, they wouldn't want to live where I live, out in the sticks, in the middle of nowhere? Or is affordable housing just something that means building more houses to scale more rapidly so that younger people can buy their own home? Or is it about changing the concepts and ideas that we have that suggest home ownership, now out of reach for many, is the goal and anything less is substandard, right? What does that mean? These are all bigger questions than I have time to explore this morning. And so while people living in tents continue to make the headlines, the reality is that for a broad range of people like this, all of our tenants, simple rental housing that they can afford is simply often out of reach. And so how are we supposed to respond? Well, that's where the parable of the fig tree comes in, right? You saw that coming. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it and found none. So he said to the gardener, "See here, for 3 years I have come looking for fruit on this fig tree, and still I see none. Cut it down. Why should it be wasting soil?" And I'll tell you, in Portugal, there isn't a little stick of soil that's not planted with some sort of tree or grapevine. He replied, "Sir, let it alone for 1 more year, until I dig around it and put manure on it, and if it bears fruit next year, well and good, but if not, then we can cut it down." So we've got this fellow with this fig tree that's been frustrating him for a number of years, and he's pruned it and he's watered it, and no fruit. And so he goes to the gardener and he complains. And for me, this parable raises a number of questions, like how did the tree get to be so big and bear fruit? Did it used to bear fruit and then it stopped? Is this climate change coming in early? What's happened to the climate here? Why is the gardener the only one that thinks of fertilizing it and not the owner? Who's the gardener to tell the owner how to run his own little tree business here and to tell him that he can't even cut it down? But the biggest question I have is that we don't get the answer. We're kind of left hanging on this one, right? He finishes the story by saying that if the tree doesn't bear fruit, then cut it down. Did it bear fruit? I have no idea. And I'm not a theologian. So if you are expecting me to give you some answers on this, you're going to be severely disappointed. Ask Laurel when she comes back. But here's what I can tell you. We're supposed to bear fruit. It's not an option, not something that we should just consider. Bear fruit or be turned into kindling. Now, I know that this is obviously interpreted as an instruction to share the good news of Jesus Christ with those in our community and offer invitations for others to follow. But if faith is dead without actions, then I also think we are called to bear fruit in very practical, here and now kind of ways. Of course, for me, that means housing. Remember, we are all called to respond to needs in our community. Well, housing is one of the most basic needs there is, and if we want to bear fruit, responding to this very basic primary need is a good place to start. But instead of just building quality housing, I think we are called to do more. We're called to create that elusive place that people can call home. And the idea of home is about relationships. So whether it's like those shared around a campfire, our tenants here at the Foundry in Elmira, or a community meal for seniors who otherwise might be isolated or alone. And we changed our name last year, 2 years ago, from Mental Homes to Beyond Housing. The idea of going beyond a house, of creating a place that people can call home. As our new name implies, we also try to go beyond in other ways too. So we have a community support worker and a community nurse who try to tend to some of those other things that they wouldn't find if they were just getting basic low rent. What does all of that mean for us here at CMF? Well, can we really expect a receptive audience to the good news if someone is hungry, or if they're ill, or if they're worrying about how to pay the rent? Again, I would suggest that access to affordable housing is an issue of justice. It is, in fact, a basic human right. And while images like this are the ones that capture the headlines, The reality is that there are many people in our community who live in poverty in silence, hidden away with nobody to advocate for them. Many people don't realize, for example, that a single senior pensioner between 64 and 75 who relies on government support as her sole source of income has an annual income, right now, $22,842, or just $1,903.54 a month. And this is what the options looked like in KW yesterday for that individual. If she needs an apartment that doesn't have stairs in it, she can maybe get something for around $1,700 a month. So after paying rent, what does she have left? $203. Affordable housing is a social justice issue. The lowest rent at our most recently completed building in St. Jacobs, $522 a month. Right? That's a tangible way to respond to this very basic need. And so thank you, all of you, for your support through our bike-a-thon, through your regular donations, your prayerful support. These things all make a difference, and those things combined are what make projects like this possible. What about here in Drayton? Right? Well, it was about a year ago that there was a grassroots organization, a group of people that gathered in this facility. They wanted to use our space to explore the idea of affordable housing right here in Drayton. They connected with another group based out of New Hamburg called Love Your Neighbor Communities, and they're hoping to actually build a 25-unit apartment building right here in town. It's going to be a cooperative. People are going to get involved. I spoke with Laurie Langdon, who was kind of my primary contact for that. He's involved. There'll be some affordable housing. There'll be some market rate housing. But, there are ways to respond here in our community as well. I'm pitching beyond housing, but there are other options out there. Now, for beyond housing, we're not sitting still either. We've finished up in St. Jacobs, and I don't know if this is being recorded today. This is not public yet. Seriously. But this is what we're going to be building in Kitchener, hopefully next spring. A 20-unit stacked townhouse apartment building with a mix of 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom apartments. And we're partnering with Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. So the focus here will be women and children who have experienced domestic violence, and we're creating permanent housing for them. This will be targeted for those individuals and their children who are currently living in shelter or emergency shelter or transitional housing. Pretty excited about this one. It's responding to a different type of need than we have in the past, but a very real need as well. So here we are again. As Christians, we are called to respond to needs that we see around us, and housing is one of the most basic needs there is. Responding to needs in our community, it's a tangible way that we demonstrate God's love. It's one way of bearing fruit. So may God bless us at CMF as we enthusiastically share the good news of Jesus by responding to needs that we see around us in our community. Amen.